That morning, I checked my bank account. It was completely empty. My daughter called and said, "Dad, the closing is tomorrow. I used your power of attorney to sell the cabin and move the retirement account. You should have seen this coming." "Good night." I said nothing. I set the phone down on the counter, and I made one phone call. When the papers were signed the following week, she learned exactly what 40 years of watching men lie for a living had taught me. If you're listening tonight, tell me where you're tuning in from. Son or daughter, grandson or granddaughter. Doesn't matter, I'm glad you're here. Let me tell you how it started. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of morning in northern Michigan where the lake throws up a mist so thick you can't see the dock from the porch. I'm Walter Danby. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a courtroom bailiff and then a private investigator for the Grand Traverse County court system, which meant I spent 3 decades watching people lie under oath and learning, better than most, what a lie sounds like when it's dressed up as love. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, going through the mail, when I noticed the bank statement was 3 days late. That was the first small thing. The second small thing was that my phone, which usually buzzed every morning with a good morning text from my daughter Renee, had been silent for 6 days straight. I want to tell you about my wife first, because you can't understand what happened to me without understanding what I'd already lost. Carol died 18 months earlier. Breast cancer. The fast kind. The kind that takes you from a diagnosis to a funeral in under a year. We'd been married 43 years. She was a second-grade teacher for 30 of them. And in her will, she'd left instructions, along with the life insurance payout, that the money be used to build something. Not a headstone, not a plaque. She wanted a small library and literacy center in the town where we raised our kids, a place for children whose parents couldn't afford books at home. That was $410,000 sitting in a dedicated account. Money I hadn't touched. Money I checked on every single week like a man checking on a sleeping child. That Tuesday morning, I opened the banking app on my tablet to transfer the monthly property tax payment, the way I did every October. The number that came up wasn't $410,000. It wasn't anything. It read $0. Now, I want you to understand something about me, because it matters for everything that comes after. I did not gasp. I did not call the bank in a panic. I did not throw the tablet across the room, though God knows I wanted to. 31 years of sitting 3 feet from witness stands teaches you that the moment you show your hand is the moment you lose the case. I set the tablet down very gently, the way you'd set down a loaded gun, and I sat there in the silence of my empty kitchen, and I thought. Before I could even finish that thought, I heard tires on gravel outside, and then the low rumble of a truck engine, and then boots on my porch steps. I walked to the front window and saw 2 men in coveralls carrying my porch swing, the one Carol and I had sat on every summer evening for 2 decades down the ramp of a moving truck. I went outside. "Excuse me," I said, and my voice came out steady, the voice I used to use when I told a jury to rise. "What exactly do you think you're doing with my swing?" The younger one set his end down and wiped his forehead. "Just doing our job, sir. New owner wants the property cleared by Friday." "New owner," I repeated. "Yes, sir. Whole place got listed and sold. We got the paperwork right here if you want to see it." He handed me a clipboard. I looked down at a bill of sale for my own home, a lake house Carol and I had bought in 1994, paid off in full 19 years ago, signed over to a buyer I'd never heard of, dated 11 days earlier, and authorized under a durable power of attorney bearing my signature. A signature I had absolutely never given. I want to be honest with you about what went through my mind in that moment, because I think a lot of you watching tonight have felt some version of it. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was a kind of vertigo, the floor tilting under you, because the name on that power of attorney belonged to my only daughter, Renee, 34 years old, the little girl I taught to ride a bike on this exact gravel driveway, the same girl I walked down the aisle 4 years ago at a wedding Carol didn't live to see. I called her. She didn't answer. I called again. On the 3rd try, she picked up, and I could hear music behind her. Laughter, glasses clinking, the unmistakable sound of a party. "Dad, I really can't talk right now. Renee, there are men taking the porch swing off my house." A pause. And then her voice changed. "And this is the part I need you to sit with, because this is the part that still wakes me up some nights." She didn't sound guilty. She sounded relieved. "Okay, good, they got there. Look, Dad, I should have told you sooner, but honestly, you never would have agreed. and Preston said the closing had to happen this week or we'd lose the buyer. I used the power of attorney from when you had your gallbladder surgery. It's still valid. I checked with a lawyer. I sold the lake house and I moved Mom's account into a joint fund Preston set up. We need it for the down payment on the venue. The wedding's in 9 days, Dad. I didn't have a choice. I sat down on my own front steps while a stranger's moving truck idled in my driveway. Your mother's money, I said slowly, was for the library. The library can wait. My wedding can't. God, why does everything have to be a fight with you? And then, before I could answer, she said the thing that told me everything I needed to know about what had actually happened to my daughter over the past year. You should have seen this coming. Good night, Dad. And she hung up. I sat on those steps for a long time. The movers finished loading the truck and drove away with pieces of my marriage stacked in the back of it. And I want you to know, I did not cry. Not that day. I went inside my half-empty house, made a fresh pot of coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, the same yellow legal pad I used to use taking notes at depositions, and I wrote down everything I knew. Preston. That was the name I kept coming back to. Preston Vance. I'd met him exactly twice. Once at a Sunday dinner where he talked for 40 minutes straight about a real estate development company he was starting, something about luxury short-term rentals up near Petoskey, and once at Christmas, where he'd given Renee a ring that was, by any objective measure, far larger than a man who talked about needing seed capital should have been able to afford. I remember Carol, God rest her, pulling me into the kitchen that Christmas and saying, very quietly, "Something about that boy doesn't sit right with me, Walt." I remember telling her she was being overprotective. I have thought about that conversation every single day since. Here is what I want you to understand about what I did next, because I think it's the part of this story that matters most. I did not call a lawyer, screaming. I did not drive to Renee's condo and pound on the door. I had spent 3 decades of my life learning one lesson above all others. The person who reacts first loses. The person who watches, who waits, who gathers, wins. So I picked up the phone and called the one man I trusted more than anyone left alive, my old partner from the investigator's office, a soft-spoken bulldog of a man named Gerald Okafor, who'd retired 2 years before me and now did private forensic work for attorneys handling exactly this kind of family fraud. "Gerald," I said, "I need you to teach me how to disappear." He laughed, then he heard the tone in my voice, and he stopped laughing. "Walt, what happened?" I told him everything. The empty account, the forged power of attorney, the sold house, my daughter's voice on the phone, relieved instead of ashamed. Gerald was quiet for a long moment, and then he said the sentence that changed the entire shape of what came next. "Okay, first thing, you're not confronting anybody. You're going to the wedding." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. You're going to walk into that wedding in 9 days like a broken old man who just got robbed by his own daughter, because that's exactly the story they've already decided to tell about you. Let them tell it. Let Preston think you're exactly what Renee's been describing to him, some sad, confused old widower who doesn't understand modern finance and can't fight back. Meanwhile, you and I are going to find out exactly what Preston Vance's real estate company actually is. I want to pause the story here and tell you something, because I know some of you are listening to this and thinking about your own children, your own quiet phone calls that never come, your own small aches that live somewhere under your ribs on a Tuesday afternoon when the house is too quiet. I loved my daughter. I love her still. Nothing that happened after this changes that fact. But love and blindness are not the same thing. And for the first time in my life, I understood that protecting Renee, the real Renee, the little girl on the bicycle, meant refusing to protect the version of her that Preston Vance had built. Over the next 9 days, Gerald and I built a case the way we used to build cases for the county prosecutor. We pulled the incorporation records for Vance Luxury Holdings LLC, registered 8 months earlier in Delaware, the kind of anonymous shell registration that tells you within about 4 seconds that somebody is hiding something. We traced the buyer of my lake house, a second LLC, this one registered to an address that turned out to be a UPS mailbox in Traverse City. We pulled Preston's public financial history and found 2 prior small claims judgments against him for unpaid contractor invoices in Ohio, a state he'd conveniently never mentioned living in. And on day 6, Gerald found the thread that unraveled the whole sweater. Preston Vance had, 4 months earlier, taken out a private hard money loan of $275,000 from a lending outfit that Gerald recognized immediately because he'd investigated them for a different client 2 years prior. It wasn't a bank. It was a group that operated out of a strip mall office in Saginaw and specialized in loans to people who couldn't get approved anywhere legitimate, the kind of lender that charges 11% interest a month and doesn't send polite letters when you're late. Preston had used that borrowed money to make it look, on paper, like his rental development company was thriving, well-funded, legitimate, exactly legitimate enough to convince a grieving widower's lonely daughter that she'd found a real catch. But the loan was coming due in 3 weeks, and Preston needed a new source of cash to cover it, fast, before the people he owed noticed he was empty. That source of cash was my dead wife's library fund and my paid-off lake house. I found out one more thing in those 9 days, and this is the part I need to tell carefully, because it's the part that broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully heal. Preston wasn't marrying Renee because he loved her. Gerald pulled phone records legally, through an attorney, the way you're supposed to, and found that Preston had been in near-daily contact for the past 5 months with a woman named Sable Reyes, a hostess at a restaurant in Traverse City. Not casual contact. Late-night contact. The kind of contact a man has with someone he's planning a different future with, once the current one has served its financial purpose. 9 days after the porch swing left my driveway, I put on the only suit I owned that still fit right, the navy one I'd worn to Carol's funeral, and I drove to the wedding. I want to walk you through this part slowly, because this is the part where everything I'd built for 9 days either worked or it didn't. The venue was a renovated barn out past Elk Rapids, string lights strung between the rafters, 200 guests in cocktail attire, an open bar that I later learned cost more than most people's mortgage payments. I walked in wearing my funeral suit, the same wedding invitation I'd received weeks ago clutched in my hand, and I made absolutely no effort to hide the fact that I looked exactly like what they expected. An old man, alone, a little lost, standing at the edge of a room full of people who were laughing at jokes he wasn't part of. Renee saw me from across the room and her face did something complicated, a flicker of guilt, quickly buried under something harder. She crossed the floor fast, grabbed my elbow, and steered me toward a side hallway with a grip that was not gentle. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "You weren't supposed to, Dad. You look like you slept in a bus station. Do you have any idea how this looks? Preston's business partners are here. Investors. This is the most important night of my life, and you're going to ruin it standing there looking like exactly what you are right now." "And what's that, Renee?" "A sad old man who can't take care of himself." Which, by the way, is exactly why the power of attorney existed in the first place. "You should be thanking me. I saved you from yourself." I let her say it. I let every word land, because Gerald had told me to let them believe it, and because some small, tired part of me needed to hear just how far gone she was before I did what came next. Preston appeared behind her, smelling like whiskey and cologne, his hand landing on my shoulder with a grip that had more threat in it than comfort. "Walter, buddy, look, I know this is hard for you, the house, all of it, but we need to talk about this somewhere private. Can't have you making a scene in front of my partners." He steered me, practically dragged me into a small office at the back of the barn, string lights and laughter fading behind a closed door. Renee followed, arms crossed. Preston leaned against a desk and looked at me with an expression I recognized instantly from 31 years of courtrooms, the look of a man who has already decided you're too weak to be a threat. "Here's how this is going to go," Preston said. "You're going to go back out there, smile for some pictures, and tomorrow my lawyer's going to send you paperwork confirming the transfers were all done properly, under a valid POA, and there's nothing to contest. You try to make trouble, and we'll have Renee's doctor sorry. I mean, we'll get you evaluated, Walter. People are going to understand. Grief does things to a man's mind." I looked at my daughter. "Is that the plan, Renee? Get me declared incompetent?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. That was answer enough. "Here is the moment. And I want you to hear this clearly, because this is the moment I had waited 9 days for." I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a plain manila envelope, and I set it on the desk between us. "Preston," I said, and my voice was the courtroom voice now, the one that used to make hostile witnesses sit up straight. "Before you finish threatening me, I want you to open that." He opened it. Inside were copies, not originals, copies, because Gerald and I aren't fools of the Delaware LLC filing, the shell company purchase of my lake house, the phone records with Sable Reyes highlighted in yellow, and a letter from an actual attorney, one I'd hired 3 days earlier, notifying him that a criminal complaint for elder financial exploitation and forgery had already been filed with the Grand Traverse County Prosecutor's Office, along with a civil suit to void the fraudulent power of attorney and reclaim both properties. The room went very quiet. Renee picked up the phone records page, and I watched her read the name Sable Reyes for the first time, watched her face change in a way I will remember for the rest of my life. "There's one more thing," I said, "and I'll admit, this next part I did allow myself to enjoy, just a little. The hard money loan you took out to fund this whole operation, Preston, the one from the Saginaw office, comes due in 12 days. I have a copy of that too. I imagine your lenders would be very interested to learn that the collateral you told them about, my house, my late wife's account, has now got a federal adjacent fraud investigation attached to it, which means it's frozen, which means you can't pay them, which means, and I say this with no pleasure at all, that you have a much bigger problem tonight than an old man in a bad suit." Renee sat down hard in the office chair. She looked at Preston. Preston looked at the door. And for the first time in 9 days, I watched real fear move across both of their faces, and it wasn't fear of me. I'm not going to draw this out longer than it deserves. What happened over the following 2 months was this. The criminal complaint moved forward. The forged power of attorney was voided by the county court within 3 weeks, which restored full legal ownership of both the lake house and Carol's account to me, though the cash itself had already been moved through Preston's shell company, which meant getting it back required the civil suit and, eventually, the involvement of the same hard money lenders Preston owed, who once they understood their collateral was compromised, moved with a speed and an aggressiveness that no court date ever could have. Preston's development company collapsed within 6 weeks. He left the state. I genuinely don't know where he went, and Gerald, who still hears things, tells me the lenders in Saginaw are not the forgiving type. Sable Reyes, as it turned out, had no idea Preston was engaged, and when she found out, she was the one who handed Gerald the last piece of documentation we needed. Renee didn't go to prison. I want to be honest about that, because I know some of you watching want a clean, hard ending, and life doesn't always give you one. The wedding never happened. The barn deposit was forfeited. The 200 guests went home that night to a very different story than the one they'd expected. She was not charged criminally. The prosecutor, and I agreed with this, took the position that she'd been manipulated into signing off on a fraud Preston had architected, and that the far greater harm had been done to her, in its own way, than by her. I don't know if that's entirely true. I don't know if it entirely matters. What I know is that 4 months after that night in the barn office, Renee showed up at my front door, my actual front door, at my actual house, because the court had restored it to me by then, and she stood on the porch, without the swing, because I hadn't replaced it yet. And she cried in a way I hadn't seen since she was 11 years old and lost a spelling bee she'd worked for months to win. "I don't know how to say I'm sorry for this," she said. "I don't think sorry is big enough." I didn't have a perfect answer for her that night, and I'm not going to pretend I did, because that wouldn't be honest. And if there's one thing I promised myself in that office at the barn, it's that I was done with anything less than the whole truth. What I told her was this, that I loved her before Preston Vance ever walked into her life, and I would love her after. But that love was never going to mean silence again. Not from me. Not ever again. The library opened last spring. We built it smaller than Carol originally planned, because some of the recovered money went to legal fees I won't bore you with. But it opened, on a Saturday in April, with 240 children's books on the shelves, and Carol's photograph on the wall by the front door, the one from 1987, where she's laughing at something just out of frame. Renee was there. She helped shelve books that morning, quiet, present, trying in the only way she currently knows how. I sit on my new porch, some evenings, no swing yet, just a chair, and I think about how close I came to losing all of it, the house, the money, the memory of my wife's last wish, and worst of all, my daughter, not to a stranger, but to a man who understood something true and terrible about grief, that it makes people easy to fool, right up until the moment it doesn't. I was a bailiff for 31 years. I watched liars sit 3 feet from a jury box, and I learned exactly what it costs a man to keep his face still while his whole world tilts sideways. I used every bit of that on the one night it mattered most, for the one person I would have given anything to never have to use it against. Family isn't the people who never hurt you. It's the people you're still willing to fight for, even after they've hurt you the worst. And at 68, sitting on this porch in the quiet, I've learned that the hardest kind of justice isn't the kind that punishes. It's the kind that leaves the door open anyway.